It was supposed to be a routine traffic stop on a quiet afternoon, but what happened next would turn the tables in the most unexpected way. A black man, dressed in a clean suit and calm demeanor, was pulled over by a white police officer who seemed more focused on assumptions than facts. With a cold stare and a sharp tone, the officer didn't ask questions, he issued commands. The man behind the wheel didn't argue. He stayed polite, calm, and followed instructions without hesitation. But beneath that calm exterior, he held a powerful secret. The officer, clearly acting out of bias, thought he was in control. His tone grew more aggressive, and his words started crossing lines that no professional should ever cross. He didn't know who he was talking to. He didn't care. All he saw was the color of the man's skin. What he failed to realize was that this man wasn't just another driver on the road. He was the newly appointed head of internal affairs, the very department that investigates officer misconduct. On that moment, the balance of power silently shifted. But the officer had no idea what was coming. The man remained calm, even as the situation escalated, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. And when he finally spoke up, everything changed. But what did he say? And how did the officer react when he learned who he had just pulled over? The story is just getting started, as the officer continued with his harsh tone, tapping on the window and asking for license and registration. The man calmly handed over his documents without a word. His expression didn't change, but something about his eyes said he'd seen this before too many times. The officer didn't recognize the name on the ID at first glance. He didn't care to look twice. Instead, he glanced at it briefly, muttered something under his breath, and returned to his patrol car to run a check, still assuming this was just another easy stop. But that name David Brooks was about to ring a loud bell. Inside the patrol car, the officer typed in the name and paused, his brow furrowed. He leaned in closer, double-checking the spelling, then leaned back slowly as the profile loaded. Department of Internal Affairs. Rank, Director, recently transferred. Known for leading high-profile investigations against police misconduct. His face went pale. Back at the car, David sat quietly, his hands still on the steering wheel, waiting. He wasn't angry. He wasn't nervous. He was just tired. Tired of being judged before a word was spoken. Tired of proving his worth to people who never bothered to look past the surface. Meanwhile, the officer stayed frozen in his seat, unsure of what to do next. He realized the man he'd spoken down to had the power to end his career. But what would David do now? Would he let it slide? Or would this moment become something bigger, something that couldn't be ignored anymore? The silence in the patrol car felt heavier by the second. Officer Reynolds stared at the screen, then back at David's calm figure in the side mirror. His pulse was racing. All the power he thought he had just minutes ago had vanished. He knew exactly who David Brooks was now, the man who had brought down 2 corrupt precinct commanders in his previous department, the man who had a reputation for being fair but firm. And now, he was sitting just 20 feet away, silently watching everything unfold. Back outside, David glanced around. A few passing drivers slowed down, curious about what was going on. One even took out a phone, just in case. It wasn't the first time someone had done that during a stop like this, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But this time, it was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what Officer Reynolds chose to do next. Inside the station across town, Sergeant Miller sat at his desk, scrolling through his inbox when he saw the alert pop up. David Brooks' ID had just been run by patrol. Miller froze. He knew David was doing spot evaluations in the field, but he didn't expect this kind of test. And now he wasn't sure if the department was ready for what might come out of it. Meanwhile, Reynolds slowly stepped out of his cruiser, trying to compose himself. Should he apologize or stick to the story? His next words could change everything, but David didn't flinch. He was ready to listen and take notes. Officer Reynolds approached slowly, rehearsing lines in his head, but nothing sounded right. The weight of his earlier behavior was now impossible to ignore. As he reached the car, David looked up at him, calm, steady, but unreadable. Reynolds cleared his throat, voice dry. "Everything checks out," he said flatly, avoiding eye contact. "You're free to go." But the words hung in the air, hollow and forced. David didn't reach for the ignition. He just looked at Reynolds and finally spoke. "Is that how you treat every driver you stop?" The question was soft, but it cut deep. Reynolds flinched. "Sir, he started, but David raised a hand gently, stopping him. "No need to explain, just think about what you did. And why." His voice carried no anger, just quiet authority. That made it hit harder. Back at the station, Sergeant Miller was already making calls. He knew the story would get out. Not just that David had been stopped, but how it happened. And more importantly, how Reynolds handled it. If David filed an official report, the fallout could be huge. The department was already under pressure after recent headlines about profiling and misconduct. Another incident, especially involving someone as high-ranking as David Brooks, could shake things from the inside. Reynolds stood frozen by the door of the car, unsure if he should say more or walk away. Every second felt like a countdown, and David, he remained calm but inside. He was deciding whether to let this be a lesson, or make it an example. Just as David was about to speak again, a second patrol car pulled up behind them. Lights flashing, engine still humming. A younger officer stepped out, clearly unaware of who David was or what had just happened. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply, walking toward Reynolds. "You need backup or something?" Reynolds turned, caught off guard. "No, it's handled," he said quickly, but the new officer was already sizing up the scene. He glanced at David, then looked back at Reynolds. "Did he give you trouble?" David's eyes didn't move, but something in his posture shifted. It was subtle, controlled. The second officer's tone was too familiar, too careless. And now, what had started as one officer's poor judgment was becoming a bigger problem. Reynolds opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the second officer stepped toward the car. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to step out of the vehicle." The tension snapped back into the air like a stretched wire. David slowly looked up at him, his calm now laced with something colder. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. Officer hesitated, confused by the question, but before anyone could explain, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into view and parked across the street. From it stepped a woman, in plain clothes, sharp-eyed badge on her hip. She was from Internal Affairs too, and she wasn't here by accident. Now the conflict wasn't just about one stop. It was becoming an operation, a test, and someone was about to fail it badly. The woman from Internal Affairs walked straight past the second officer without a word. Her focus locked on David. "Director Brooks," she said firmly, but with respect. "We've seen enough." Her voice carried authority, and both officers went silent. The second officer stepped back, confused but suddenly nervous. Reynolds already knew what was coming. He looked like he wanted to disappear. David stepped out of the car, finally revealing the badge that had stayed tucked in his inner jacket pocket all along. "This wasn't random," he said, turning to face both officers. "We've been running unannounced field evaluations across the city, watching how our officers interact with the public, especially those who don't fit their assumptions." He paused, eyes on Reynolds. "Today, you both gave us exactly what we were looking for." The second officer's face went pale. "Wait, this was a setup," he muttered. But it wasn't just a setup, it was a mirror, a reflection of what had gone unchecked far too long. Sergeant Miller's voice suddenly crackled through Reynolds' radio. "Bring both officers in now." But just as Reynolds stepped forward to surrender his badge, David held up a hand. Not yet the crowd that had quietly gathered on the sidewalk was watching. Phones were recording. David turned toward them, then back to the officers. "Let everyone see this moment, because accountability doesn't happen behind closed doors anymore." Then, as the tension seemed to break, David looked directly at the second officer and added, "And check your locker when you get back. You were already under review." The younger officer's jaw dropped. The twist wasn't just that David was in charge. It was that the entire stop had been recorded, reviewed, and was now part of a much bigger investigation already in motion. Officers were escorted back to the station that afternoon, not in cuffs but under full review. Internal Affairs opened immediate investigations into both their conduct, and by the end of the week, one had been suspended pending a hearing, while the other was placed on probation. David Brooks didn't push for harsh punishment. What he wanted was change not just on paper, but in how people were treated on the streets every day. At a press conference days later, David stood before reporters and spoke openly about the incident. He didn't name names. Instead, he focused on the real issue: accountability, bias in policing, and the need for transparency. "This wasn't about catching someone," he said. "It was about holding up a mirror. The badge is supposed to stand for justice, not judgment." Public response was mixed. Some deafened,